Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are unpacking a massive, literally multi-trillion-dollar global infrastructure project, China's Belt and Road Initiative, or the BRI. Since President Xi Jinping launched it back in 2013, this initiative has systematically reshaped over 150 countries. We're going to take a really close look at the BRI's role as this incredibly powerful instrument in international statecraft, how it's evolved over the last decade, and the very real impact it's having on the developing world today. So let's just dive right into the ultimate question that completely dominates international relations right now. Is the BRI a genuine win-win development project, just like China claims, or is it a malicious geopolitical debt trap designed to subjugate vulnerable nations, which is what a lot of Western critics argue? Well, as you might guess, the answer is a lot more nuanced than a simple yes or no. And honestly, the data tells a fascinating story. To get to the truth, this explainer is going to cover 5 key areas. First, the Middle Kingdom returns. Second, the progress of the initiative. Third, 2 key case studies. Fourth, the debt trap debate. And finally, fifth, the reality of structural leverage. Let's get into it. Okay, Section 1, the Middle Kingdom returns. To really grasp China's modern ambitions, we absolutely have to understand the Chinese dream and its historical self-conception as the Middle Kingdom. Basically, a civilizational center entitled to global deference. After what China refers to as the century of humiliation at the hands of foreign powers, they view the BRI internally as the main vehicle to return to their rightful place as a preeminent global power. When President Xi launched the Silk Road Economic Belt and the Maritime Silk Road in 2013, he essentially had 3 core aims in mind. First up, protect national security. The idea here is to establish a network of economic dependence that balances against U.S. global domination. Second, secure economic benefits. China needed vast new markets for its industrial overcapacity. Basically, they needed to export their excess construction and manufacturing capabilities. And third, financial integration. They wanted to internationalize the Chinese currency and establish alternative funding mechanisms, like the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, to directly challenge Western-led institutions. Now, during the pandemic, there were a lot of rumors going around that the BRI was in decline or, running out of money. But the data proves the exact opposite. Get this. In 2025 alone, China signed a record-breaking $213.5 billion in new Belt and Road deals. That's a staggering amount of money, and it proves the initiative isn't fading at all. It's actually accelerating and adapting to our new global economic reality. Moving on to Section 2, progress of the initiative. We are seeing a massive shift in exactly how and where China is spending all this money as we enter what analysts are calling Phase 2 of the BRI. So instead of just pouring billions into massive, super risky roads and ports like they used to, China's updated 2026 strategy focuses on smaller, highly commercially disciplined projects. They are heavily pivoting towards what's known as the new 3, electric vehicles, batteries, and green energy tech. Geographically, Africa actually displaced developing Asia in 2025, receiving over $61 billion in investments as China races to lock down vital mineral supply chains. Meanwhile, foundational projects like the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor have morphed into CPEC 2.0, focusing on high-quality development that aligns with local frameworks, like Pakistan's 5E strategy for economic recovery. You can really see this physical footprint expanding in Central Asia. Investments in construction across Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Kyrgyzstan are absolutely booming. China has funded over 112 projects in this region alone. And listen, this isn't just random spending. It's a highly strategic push to boost connectivity right on its border, linking its landlocked Xinjiang province directly to the rest of the world, and, importantly, securing overland routes that bypass vulnerable maritime choke points. All right, Section 3, 2 key case studies. To truly wrap our heads around the geopolitical impact of these massive investments, we need to see how this actually plays out on the ground. We're going to compare 2 vastly different South Asian case studies. On one side, we have Pakistan's CPEC. This is a mammoth, $60 billion land-based corridor designed to solve chronic energy crises, literally plugging 10,000 megawatts of power into their national grid and building sprawling highway networks. On the flip side, we have Sri Lanka. The engagement here is much smaller, around $3.6 billion, and it's heavily maritime-focused, centered entirely around post-Civil War recovery, deepwater ports, and boosting foreign direct investment. In Pakistan, the strategic integration is incredibly deep. CPEC gives China crucial access to the Gwadar port on the Arabian Sea, which lets Chinese energy imports completely bypass the US-controlled Malacca Strait. But this comes with some intense geopolitical friction because the corridor passes right through disputed Kashmir territory, which deeply angers India. Plus, this economic alliance has morphed into heavy military collaboration. Get this. Between 2020 and 2024, a staggering 81% of Pakistan's arms imports came directly from China, and that includes jointly produced fighter jets. Meanwhile, over in Sri Lanka, the focus is all about the ocean. China funded the Hambantota Deepwater Port and is currently building the massive Colombo Port City, which is a reclaimed land financial center. And the cash keeps flowing. Just in 2025, the Chinese energy giant Sinopec entered with a massive $4.5 billion green refinery project in Hambantota. Now, while this brings much-needed infrastructure, it has totally fueled intense fears in neighboring India of a Chinese string of pearls, which is a strategic, paranoia-inducing naval encirclement in the Indian Ocean. Which brings us to Section 4, the debt trap debate, because all this rapid infrastructure development absolutely comes at a cost. Coined by Indian scholar Brahma Chalane back in 2017, the debt trap is the idea that China intentionally lends money to developing nations knowing full well they can't pay it back, specifically to seize their strategic assets. Now, the debt burden itself is very real, especially in places like Central Asia. Take Kyrgyzstan, for example. The country owes roughly $1.7 billion directly to China's Export-Import Bank. That single slice accounts for over 40% of its entire external debt. When one single bilateral creditor holds that much of a nation's debt, it naturally creates a pretty severe power imbalance. And in extreme cases, this pressure has very tangible consequences. In neighboring Tajikistan, it's even more pronounced. They owe a massive 60% of their $3.3 billion international debt to China. Because of that crushing burden, reports indicate that Tajikistan has actually been forced to settle some of its debts in kind, literally granting development rights and concessions to its state-owned gold and silver mines directly to Chinese entities. Pakistan is definitely feeling this squeeze too. Following those massive CPEC investments, Pakistan's external debt shot up by 20 to 22%. By 2026, they're projected to owe an estimated $30 billion to China alone. This heavy borrowing, combined with their own domestic economic issues, contributed to a crippling circular debt crisis in the energy sector, where unpaid bills just cascade all the way through the supply chain, hitting over 1.6 trillion Pakistani rupees. This severe lack of cash has repeatedly forced Islamabad to beg for emergency bailouts from the IMF just to keep the lights on. But, and this is a big but, to cut through the political rhetoric, we really have to look closely at the actual data. When Sri Lanka tragically and infamously defaulted on its national debt in 2022, an event that the media widely pointed to as a textbook Chinese debt trap, Chinese debt actually only made up about 6 to 10% of Sri Lanka's total external debt. Academic analyses show the crisis was largely triggered by domestic policy failures, tax cuts, and a heavy profile of Western sovereign bonds, rather than some deliberate, malicious Chinese entrapment scheme. And that perfectly transitions us to Section 5, the reality of structural leverage. This brings us to a crucial academic consensus on what China is actually doing with all this debt, if it isn't an intentional trap. Think about it. If China was truly acting as a predatory lender, maliciously setting traps to seize sovereign assets, their recent actions just wouldn't make any sense. During times of severe global distress, China actually postponed Kenya's debt payments. They voluntarily reduced the Maldives' debt burden. They renegotiated and quickly cut Malaysia's rail debt by a third. And between 2023 and 2025, they actively helped restructure Sri Lanka's debt with a $2 billion relief package. A true predator would have used those defaults to seize assets, but China mostly chose renegotiation. As updated 2026 academic research thoroughly concludes, the narrative really needs a correction. China isn't setting deliberate, cartoonish traps. Instead, as this quote summarizes so well, they are gaining immense ordinary structural leverage, simply by being the dominant, often opaque creditor that manages the day-to-day survival of distressed developing nations over years and decades. China naturally accrues massive geopolitical power. Ultimately, China doesn't need a trap. Whether it's through securing favorable United Nations votes, pressuring nations to shift their foreign policy away from Taiwan, or slowly gaining operational control and logistics access to critical deepwater ports, China achieves its geopolitical goals. It does this through the natural, undeniable gravity of its financial dominance and its position as the indispensable lender to the global South. Which leaves us with a final provocative thought to consider today. As China's massive infrastructure machine pivots away from pouring concrete for roads and ports and moves toward controlling the future of electric vehicles, critical minerals, and green energy, we have to ask, is the developing world finally getting the vital connectivity and technology it desperately needs to grow? Or are they simply trading one historical form of global dependency for a brand new one? Something to think about. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the world around you.